Vincent the King Martini was a man who didn't believe in mercy. He believed in leverage, loyalty, and lead. He was the Iron Crown of Chicago's underworld, a man who had stared down federal prosecutors and walked away from assassination attempts without flinching. But when a sniper's bullet lodged itself millimeters from his aorta, he demanded only one thing: the angel of the underground. The ghost doctor whispered about in back alleys, the medical miracle who saved lives the system had abandoned. He expected some grizzled old surgeon slumming it for penance. He expected someone hardened by the streets. But when the VIP suite doors swung open, the Don's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just the dirt smudging her cheeks or the oversized scrubs hanging off her small frame. It wasn't even the way the entire room fell silent as she walked in, soot-stained and unflinching. It was her eyes, those same dark eyes that had looked up at him through the smoke of a burning warehouse on 5th Street. Eyes he'd seen every night in his nightmares for 10 years. Eyes that belonged to a ghost, to the girl he'd accidentally condemned to the flames during a turf war gone wrong. Mary Andrews, alive, holding a scalpel. And for the first time in his ruthless life, Vincent the King Martini, the man who had never shown weakness, never surrendered, never broke, collapsed unconscious to the hospital floor. The Iron Don had finally met the one enemy he couldn't face, his own guilt, walking back from the dead. If you love stories like this, hit that subscribe button and comment where you are watching from. The page came through just as Mary was suturing the 3rd-degree burns on old Miguel's forearms. Her hands didn't shake. They never did. But her jaw tightened when she saw the extension number flash across the ancient pager, clipped to her scrubs. VIP wing, 4th floor. Dr. Andrews, you're needed upstairs. Emergency. They said. The young resident who'd burst into the boiler room clinic stopped mid-sentence, taking in the scene. The makeshift operating table fashioned from maintenance carts, the flickering fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic mixed with steam and rust. They said to come immediately. Mary didn't look up from her work. Tell them I'm with a patient. They said it's critical, and the resident swallowed hard. They said you're the only one he'll see. Her fingers paused for just a fraction of a second. In the underground clinic, that word, he, spoken with that particular tremor of fear, meant only one kind of patient. The kind who came with bodyguards and secrets, the kind the administration wanted, handled quietly, efficiently, and far away from the press. Finish this, she said to one of the volunteer nurses, a former addict she'd saved from an overdose 2 years ago. Standard burn protocol. He knows the drill. Miguel grabbed her wrist with his good hand, his weathered face creased with concern. Doctora, you look like you crawled through hell. Maybe you clean up first, no? Mary glanced down at herself. Her scrubs were splattered with soot from the boiler explosion that had sent Miguel and 2 other maintenance workers to her door. Her hair had come loose from its ponytail hours ago. There was grime under her fingernails and a smear of something dark, oil or blood or both, across her collarbone. She looked exactly like what she was, a surgeon who worked in the hospital's forgotten spaces, treating the patients who couldn't afford the gleaming towers above. They asked for the best, she said simply, not the prettiest. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like ascending into a different world. The basement levels smelled like hot metal and desperation. Up here, everything was cream-colored walls, and the artificial scent of lavender pumped through the ventilation system. By the time the doors opened, she could hear the shouting. Don't care if he's the Pope himself. You get me, Dr. Pausch. Chen, or I'll burn this goddamn hospital to the ground. 2 security guards stood helplessly outside Suite 412, and through the open door, Mary could see chaos. A man in a blood-soaked dress shirt, his jacket torn away, was half sitting up on the hospital bed, despite the protests of 3 nurses. One arm swept out, knocking a tray of surgical instruments to the floor with a crash that made everyone flinch. Everyone except Mary. She'd seen worse. She'd been worse. "Mr. Martini," the chief of surgery was saying, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Dr. Chen is our finest cardiothoracic surgeon. He trained at—" "I said no!" The man's voice was a roar of pain and fury. "I want the angel, the one from the underground, the ghost doctor. I want her, or I want nobody." Mary stepped into the doorway. The room went silent. She was aware of how she must look to them. This girl who barely cleared 5'4", who looked young enough to be a medical student, standing there covered in the evidence of the hospital's hidden underbelly. The chief of surgery's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. One of the nurses actually gasped, but Mary's eyes were locked on the man in the bed. She'd seen his face before, of course, in newspapers, in the background of crime photos. Vincent Martini, they called him, the King of Chicago, the man who controlled everything from the ports to the politicians. But that wasn't the face she was seeing now. She was seeing a boy, 17, maybe 18. Dark eyes wide with horror as flames consumed the old warehouse. Seeing him scream her name into the smoke. Seeing him dragged away by his father's men while the building collapsed. Seeing the exact moment he'd left her to die. Vincent's gaze found hers across the sterile white room, and something shifted in his expression. The fury drained away. The color left his face. His lips formed a single word, soundless, disbelieving. Mary. She watched the recognition hit him like a physical blow, watched 10 years of guilt crash down on the man who supposedly felt nothing. His eyes rolled back, and before anyone could move, the most dangerous man in Chicago crumpled backward onto the pillows, unconscious. Machines started beeping, nurses rushed forward. The chief of surgery barked orders. But Mary stood perfectly still for one more heartbeat, staring at the unconscious face of the boy who'd haunted her nightmares, the ghost she'd never been able to exorcise. Then she rolled up her dirty sleeves, walked to the sink, and began scrubbing in. "Someone get me his chart," she said quietly, "and clear the room. All of you except essential surgical staff." Because Vincent Martini had asked for the angel of the underground, and whether he knew it or not, he was about to find out that angels remember everything. If this story is interesting, subscribe and help them continue reaching others who need comfort. The smell of antiseptic couldn't quite mask the metallic tang of blood, and for a moment, just a breath. Mary was 17 again, and the air tasted like smoke. 5th Street, 10 years ago. Summer. The warehouse had been abandoned for months, a skeleton of brick and rotting wood that served as neutral ground between the Martini family and the Volkov crew. Mary shouldn't have been there. She'd only come because Vincent had asked her to, his voice crackling through the cheap burner phone he'd given her for emergencies. "Just wait for me by the east entrance," he'd said. "I need to see you. Please, Mary. It's important." She'd waited in the shadows, watching the sun set through the broken windows, unaware that 2 blocks away, Vincent's father was orchestrating a meeting that was never meant to end peacefully. She didn't know about the gasoline-soaked rags the Volkov soldiers had planted. Didn't know about the cigarette that would be carelessly, or perhaps deliberately, dropped. She only knew the moment the world turned orange. Vincent had come running, screaming her name, but his father's men held him back. "Let it burn," the old Don had said. Everyone in there is already dead. Including, they all believed, the girl Vincent Martini loved more than the empire he was born to inherit. Dr. Andrews, with all due respect. The chief of surgery's voice snapped her back to the present. He'd pulled her into the hallway, away from the suite where Vincent lay unconscious. You cannot possibly perform this surgery. Look at yourself. You're not even properly dressed. You haven't been briefed. And frankly, I don't care what Mr. Martini thinks he wants. I have protocols to... Protocols. Mary's voice was soft, but it cut through his bluster like a scalpel. Your protocols would have Miguel downstairs lose both his arms because he doesn't have insurance. Your protocols would have let Mrs. Chen die in the waiting room last month because her paperwork wasn't complete. Don't talk to me about protocols, Dr. Morrison. His face flushed red. That's different. This is a man with a bullet near his aorta. A man who will die if I don't operate in the next 30 minutes. She met his eyes steadily. I've read his chart. The bullet entered through the second intercostal space, tracking posteromedially. It's lodged between the arch of the aorta and the superior vena cava. One wrong move and he exsanguinates. You want Dr. Chen? Fine, call him. But I've done this surgery 4 times in the last year. Gunshot wounds don't wait for credentials to be verified. A nurse Mary recognized, Angela, one of the good ones, appeared at her elbow. Dr. Andrews is right. I pulled Mr. Martini's scans. The trajectory is... It's bad. Really bad. Morrison's jaw worked silently. Behind him, through the window of the suite, Mary could see Vincent beginning to stir, his fingers twitching against the sheets. Where? Morrison finally asked. Where have you performed this procedure 4 times? Basements, parking garages, once in the back of a restaurant. Mary didn't blink. On patients who couldn't come here. Patients who would die in the street before they'd trust your clean white walls. She'd crawled out of that warehouse with her lungs full of smoke and her left arm burned from wrist to shoulder. A homeless veteran named Jack had found her in the alley, had wrapped her in his coat and dragged her to a free clinic 6 blocks away. The news had reported no survivors. The Martini family had held a private memorial. And Mary Andrews had learned that sometimes being dead was safer than being alive. She'd lived in those forgotten spaces for 2 years, sleeping in shelters, working under the table at diners, until a retired surgeon named Dr. Patricia Moore had found her treating a stab wound with fishing line and vodka. Patricia had seen something in the fierce, damaged girl, had trained her, mentored her, pushed her through medical school on scholarships and sheer stubborn will. You're going to save lives, Patricia had told her, the lives that everyone else gives up on. And Mary had. In the places where the system failed, she'd become legend, the angel of the underground. Morrison looked at her, really looked, and Mary wondered what he saw. The dirt, certainly, the exhaustion. But maybe finally, he also saw the steady hands, the unflinching gaze, the absolute certainty of someone who'd already died once and had nothing left to fear. Or 3, he said finally. 20 minutes. But I'm observing. No. Mary's voice was iron. My operating room, my rules. No observers except essential surgical staff. If you want to watch, you can do it from the gallery. This is highly irregular. So is a Mafia Boss in your VIP suite. She turned toward the scrub room. Angela, I need you on instruments. Get me whoever's best on anesthesia. And someone find me clean scrubs that actually fit. She paused at the threshold, looking back at Morrison one last time. He asked for me, she said quietly. The angel of the underground. That's who I am. That's who's going to save his life, whether or not you like how I look doing it." Behind her, in the suite, Vincent Martini opened his eyes and whispered a dead girl's name. Mary didn't look back. She had a ghost to resurrect. The operating theatre was cathedral quiet, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor and the whisper of the ventilator, breathing for Vincent Martini. Mary stood over him, gloved hands hovering above the sterile field, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to really look at his face. Without the fury, without the consciousness, he looked younger. The hard lines around his mouth had softened. She could almost see the boy who used to bring her stolen pastries from his father's bakery front, who'd taught her to pick locks on the abandoned cars in the junkyard, who'd promised her they'd get out of the slums together someday. "Dr. Andrews?" Angela's voice was gentle. "Ready when you are." Mary blinked, refocusing. Her personal history had no place here. Right now, Vincent Martini wasn't a ghost from her past. He was a puzzle of flesh and bone and blood, and she was the only one who could solve it. Scalpel! The blade met skin with the certainty of a promise. Mary's first incision was flawless, a median sternotomy, straight down the center of his chest. The rib spreader came next, and she worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned surgery in places where hesitation meant death. "Jesus," someone muttered from the gallery above. Probably Morrison. Mary ignored him. Her focus had narrowed to the cavity before her, the kingdom of the heart, with all its treacherous geography. Blood pooled in the pericardial space, and she suctioned it away, revealing the bullet's path. "There," she murmured. "Do you see it, Angela? The track follows the posterior mediastinum. Whoever shot him knew exactly what they were doing. A centimeter to the left, and it would have clipped the aorta outright. A centimeter to the right, and it would have missed everything vital." "Intentional?" Angela asked. "Maybe. Or lucky." Mary's fingers moved with delicate precision, separating tissue layers. Either way, they wanted him to suffer. The bullet had carved a path through muscle and connective tissue before lodging itself in the worst possible location, pressed against the aortic arch like a loaded threat. One slip, one moment of carelessness, and Vincent would bleed out before they could even attempt to save him. But Mary's hands didn't shake. They never did. She'd learned steadiness in the underground clinic, where there were no second chances, no crash carts waiting, no teams of specialists to call. She'd learned to be enough, all by herself, because the people she saved had no one else. Forceps, the micro ones. The metal touched her palm, and she began the painstaking work of dissecting around the bullet. The tissue here was angry, inflamed, trying to wall off the foreign object. She worked millimeter by millimeter, freeing it from the biological cage the body had attempted to build. And then she saw them. Scars. Old scars, years healed, spiderwebbing across the pericardium in patterns she recognized immediately. Burn scars, the kind left by superheated air and smoke inhalation, by a body that had fought desperately to survive trauma that should have been fatal. Her breath caught. Vincent had scars too, from that night, from the fire he'd started trying to save her. "Dr. Andrews!" Angela's voice seemed to come from very far away. Mary forced herself back. The bullet was almost free now, just a few more careful cuts, a little more retraction. She worked in silence, her mind splitting itself between past and present, between the girl who'd burned and the woman who'd survived. Finally, with a precision that would have made Dr. Moore proud, she extracted the bullet and dropped it into the specimen tray with a soft clink. That's when she saw it. The bullet wasn't standard issue. wasn't anything she'd seen in the dozens of gunshot wounds she'd treated over the years. It had an unusual sheen, a distinctive colouring that made her pause even as she continued the work of repairing the damage it had left behind. "Angela, bring me that tray." The nurse complied, holding it closer. Under the surgical lights, the bullet gleamed with an almost pearlescent quality. Silver mixed with lead, swirled together in a pattern that was as distinctive as a signature. "Do you recognize this?" Mary asked, not looking up from her suturing. Angela leaned closer. I'm not sure. Is it custom?" "Very custom." Mary's voice was tight. She'd seen bullets like this exactly once before, during a late-night emergency 3 years ago. A Martini enforcer, gut shot in a territory dispute, had been brought to her underground clinic by his panicked girlfriend. She'd saved his life, and in gratitude, he'd warned her about things she shouldn't know. Silver-lead composite rounds, specially made for the Martini family's inner circle. Expensive, rare, and traceable only to one source, the family's own armory. Vincent Martini hadn't been shot by a rival gang or a federal sniper. He'd been shot by one of his own. Mary's hands continued their work automatically, repairing tissue, checking for additional damage, ensuring every vessel was secure. But her mind was racing. Whoever had tried to kill Vincent had access to the family's private ammunition stock, had knowledge of his schedule, his location, his vulnerabilities. The betrayal was intimate, personal. "Closing," she announced, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her chest. "Let's get him into recovery. And Angela." The nurse looked up, meeting her eyes. "That bullet stays with me. No chain of custody, no evidence room. It doesn't leave my sight." Angela hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Understood." Mary placed the final suture, her fingers moving with mechanical precision. Above her, in the gallery, Morrison was probably already composing his report. Around her, the surgical team was breathing sighs of relief. But Mary felt no relief, because when Vincent Martini woke up, she was going to have to tell him the truth, that the real danger hadn't been the bullet in his chest. It was the person who'd put it there. Vincent surfaced from anesthesia like a drowning man breaching dark water, violently, desperately, with a gasp that made the monitors scream. His hand flew to his chest, finding bandages instead of the hole he expected, and for a moment he couldn't remember where he was or why everything hurt. Then he saw her. Mary sat in the chair beside his bed, still in surgical scrubs, clean ones now, though her hair remained pulled back in that same messy ponytail. She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze was fixed on something in her palm, turning it over and over between her fingers with the focused intensity of someone trying to solve an impossible equation. "You're alive," he rasped, his voice like gravel. "So are you." She didn't look up. Against considerable odds. The recovery room was private, he noticed. No nurses hovering, no bodyguards at the door, just the two of them, and 10 years of silence stretching between them like a chasm. "Mary, He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain lanced through his chest, white-hot and absolute. "Don't." Her voice was sharp. "You have 53 sutures holding your sternum together. Move like that again, and you'll undo 4 hours of work." He settled back against the pillows, studying her face. She'd changed, and yet she hadn't. The softness was gone, burned away by whatever she'd endured after the fire. But the eyes were the same, those dark, unflinching eyes that had always seen through his lies. "I thought you were dead," he said quietly. "I saw the building collapse. They wouldn't let me go back. My father, I know what your father did." Now she looked at him, and the weight of her gaze was almost physical. "I know what you all did. You left me there, Vincent. I tried, not hard enough." The words landed like a slap. Vincent closed his eyes, and there it was again, the nightmare that had haunted him for a decade. The flames, her name torn from his throat, his father's men dragging him away while he fought and screamed and broke. "I looked for you," he said, "for years. I sent people to every hospital, every morgue, I didn't want to be found." Mary stood, moving to the window. "I built a new life, a good life, away from your world." In a hospital basement, treating burns in a boiler room? His voice was harsher than he intended. "That's the life you chose?" She turned on him, and for the first time, he saw real anger flash across her face. "I chose to help people. People like the ones your family destroys every day. People who have nowhere else to go because men like you and your father have taken everything from them. I'm not my father. Aren't you?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Vincent Martini, the King of Chicago. I've read the newspapers. I know what you've become." He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the truth was a lead weight in his chest, heavier than any bullet. She was right. He'd become exactly what his father had groomed him to be, a monster in an expensive suit. "Why did you save me?" he asked finally. Mary was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was softer. "Because I took an oath, and because—" She stopped, shook her head. "It doesn't matter." She crossed back to the bed and held out her hand. In her palm lay a bullet, gleaming dully under the fluorescent lights. "Do you recognize this?" Vincent frowned, reaching for it. His fingers brushed hers, the first time they'd touched in 10 years, and he felt her stiffen before pulling away. He held the bullet up to the light, and his blood turned to ice. Silver lead composite, the distinctive swirl pattern, the custom weight. "No," he breathed. "You know what it is." "That's not possible." But even as he said it, he knew it was. Knew it with a certainty that felt like his heart stopping all over again. "Only 5 people have access to these. My inner circle. The bullets are kept in a secure vault. The combination is known to your most trusted men," Mary finished. "I treated one of your soldiers a few years ago. He told me about them. Said they were a symbol of loyalty, that only the family's elite carried them." Vincent's mind raced through the possibilities, through the faces of the men he'd built his empire with. Antonio, his consigliere, loyal for 30 years. Marco, his driver, had taken a bullet for Vincent's father. Sal, his accountant, boring, meticulous, impossible to imagine betraying anyone. And Rico, the butcher, Castellano, his second-in-command, his childhood friend, the man who'd stood beside him at his father's funeral, who'd helped him consolidate power, who'd been pushing for months for Vincent to expand into territories Vincent had deemed too risky, who'd been alone with Vincent's schedule the night of the shooting, who'd insisted Vincent take the meeting at the warehouse district. Neutral ground, he'd said. Safe ground. Rico. Vincent's voice cracked on the name. Jesus Christ, it was Rico. Mary said nothing, just watched him process the betrayal, and it was a betrayal that cut deeper than the bullet had. Rico had been there the night of the fire, had helped drag Vincent away from the burning warehouse, had sat with him through the dark days after, when Vincent had been half mad with grief, had pretended to mourn Mary alongside him. He wants the crown, Vincent said, his voice hardening with each word. He's been positioning himself for months. I thought, I thought he was just ambitious, eager. I never thought that he'd kill you for it." Vincent looked down at the bullet in his palm. Such a small thing, such a catastrophic thing. The physical proof of his own blindness, his own failure to see the snake in his garden. Something shifted in his chest. Not physical, though the pain was real enough. A decade of guilt and grief crystallized into something harder, colder. "How long before he finds out I'm alive?" he asked. "The hospital staff has been told you're critical but stable. If Rico has sources here, he does. Everyone does." Vincent met her eyes. "He'll send someone to finish the job. Maybe tonight. Maybe in an hour." "I know." Mary pulled a phone from her pocket. "That's why we're leaving." "We? You can't walk on your own. You'll need help." Her jaw set in that stubborn line he remembered so well. "And that bullet? It's the only proof you have. Someone needs to keep it safe." Vincent stared at her. This ghost who'd come back to save him, who had every reason to let him die but hadn't. "Why are you doing this?" Mary was quiet for a moment, her fingers tight around the phone. "Because 10 years ago, a boy I loved made a terrible mistake," she said finally. "And I'm not going to let him die before he has a chance to make it right." The two men entered at 11:47 p.m., during the shift change when the recovery wing was always understaffed. Mary had been expecting them, or someone like them, since the moment she'd shown Vincent the bullet. She'd positioned herself between Vincent's bed and the door, ostensibly checking his vitals but really watching the hallway through the narrow window, when the orderlies appeared, pushing a supply cart with the slow, deliberate pace of men who belonged there. Everything inside her went still and sharp. "Evening," the taller one said, his smile professionally bland. "Just here to restock." Mary's eyes dropped to their feet. Standard hospital orderlies wore soft-soled shoes, cheap sneakers, or worn Crocs. Footwear meant for 12-hour shifts on linoleum floors. These men wore boots, tactical boots, the kind with reinforced toes and thick treads, scuffed from use but expensive. The kind you wore when you expected to run or fight or drag a body. "Wrong room," she said evenly. "Supplies are kept in the utility closet. 2 doors down." The shorter one, stocky, with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, exchanged a glance with his partner. "Our mistake. New to this floor." But they didn't turn around. They stepped further into the room, and Mary saw the taller one's hand drift toward the supply cart, toward something hidden beneath the white linens. Behind her, she heard Vincent shift in the bed, heard his breathing change as consciousness sharpened. He'd seen them too, recognized the predatory stillness that marked them as hunters rather than hospital staff. "Mary," his voice was low, warning. "I need you both to leave," Mary said, her tone still calm but with steel underneath. "This is a restricted recovery room. No unauthorized personnel." "Of course, Doctor." The tall one smiled again, but his hand was definitely moving now, reaching. "Just let us grab what we came for, and we'll be out of your way." The silencer cleared the linens like a snake emerging from grass, matte black, professionally attached to a Glock 19. His partner mirrored the motion half a second later, and suddenly Mary was staring down 2 barrels in a recovery room with a patient who could barely move and a door that was far, far too distant. "Step away from the bed," Scarface said, his professional veneer dropping. "Nice and slow. This doesn't have to involve you." Mary's mind raced through possibilities. She had no weapon, no panic button within reach. She'd disabled the one by Vincent's bed precisely so it wouldn't accidentally summon witnesses. No phone in her pocket. She'd planned for escape, not confrontation. But she'd also spent 10 years working in places where threats came with drawn weapons and no backup. "You're going to shoot a doctor in a hospital?" she asked, buying time. Her eyes scanned the room, the IV stand, the monitors, the crash cart she'd wheeled in earlier, the cleaning supplies on the lower shelf. "The cameras are on a loop," the tall one interrupted, "and you'd be surprised what gets covered up in this city. Now step aside. Last warning." Vincent tried to sit up, his face contorting with pain. "You work for Rico. You tell him I'm dead." Scarface leveled his weapon at Vincent's chest. "That's the only message we're sending." Mary moved, not away from the bed, toward it. Toward the crash cart and the shelf below, where housekeeping had left their supplies after the evening cleaning. Her hands found the spray bottles before her conscious mind had fully formed the plan. Industrial ammonia in one hand, bleach in the other. "Don't," the tall one started, but Mary was already spraying. She mixed the chemicals in mid-air, creating a cloud of chlorine gas that billowed outward in a toxic plume. The reaction was immediate and violent. The acrid smell hit like a physical force, and both gunmen staggered backward, their eyes streaming. "Jesus Christ!" Scarface fired blind, the silenced shot punching into the wall above Vincent's head. Mary grabbed the IV stand and swung it like a quarterstaff, connecting with the tall one's wrist. The gun clattered to the floor. She kicked it under the bed and threw the ammonia bottle directly at Scarface's face. It connected with a wet crack, and he howled, his own weapon discharging into the ceiling tiles. "Vincent, move!" She was already at the bed, ripping out his IV line, hauling him up by his good arm. He was heavy, disoriented, and every movement pulled at his fresh sutures, but he pushed through the pain and got his feet under him. The room was filling with toxic gas now, the chlorine cloud spreading. Mary's own eyes were burning, her throat closing, but she'd held her breath the moment she'd sprayed. She'd learned that trick in medical school. During a hazmat training session, she'd taken far more seriously than most of her classmates. She dragged Vincent toward the door, supporting most of his weight. Behind them, the two hitmen were on their knees, coughing, blinded, their weapons forgotten in their scramble to breathe. They burst into the hallway just as Mary's lungs began to scream for air. She gasped, pulling Vincent with her, and he stumbled, but stayed upright, one hand pressed against his bandaged chest. "The tunnels," she panted. "Can you make it to the service elevator?" He nodded, his face grey with pain, but his jaw set with that old martini determination. "Which way?" An alarm began shrieking, the chemical sensors in the recovery room finally registering the toxic cloud. In seconds, the floor would be flooded with staff, with security, with witnesses, and maybe with more of Rico's men. Mary pulled Vincent toward a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only," the same door she'd used countless times to move between her underground clinic and the hospital proper. The door that led to the forgotten places, the maintenance corridors, the spaces between spaces where people like her survived. "This way," she said. "And Vincent?" "Yeah. When this is over, you're funding a proper ventilation system for my clinic." Despite everything, the pain, the betrayal, the assassins behind them, Vincent laughed. It was short and sharp and cost him, but it was real. "Deal!" he gasped. And together, a mafia king and the ghost he'd left for dead disappeared into the hospital's hidden heart. The service elevator lurched downward with a grinding protest that suggested it hadn't been inspected in years. Vincent leaned heavily against the wall, one arm wrapped around his chest, his breathing shallow and labored. Blood had begun to seep through his bandages, small blooms of crimson spreading across the white gauze. "How far down?" he managed. "3 more floors. Below the morgue." Mary kept her hand on his shoulder, steadying him as the elevator shuddered. There's a network of tunnels that run under the whole hospital. Steam pipes, electrical conduits, old civil defense shelters from the Cold War. Most people don't even know they exist. The elevator groaned to a stop, and the doors opened onto a corridor that looked like it belonged to a different era. Exposed pipes ran along the ceiling, dripping condensation. The walls were painted institutional green, the paint peeling in long strips. A single flickering bulb provided the only light. Vincent stepped out and immediately understood why Mary always looked like she'd crawled out of the earth itself. This was her world. The hospital's underworld. Jesus, Mary, you've been working down here? He followed her down the corridor, each step pulling at his sutures, each breath a reminder of the hole in his chest. For how long? 3 years in these specific tunnels, longer in places like them. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew every turn, every shadow. Her hand trailed along the wall, following some invisible map only she could read. After Dr. Moore died, the hospital tried to shut down the free clinic, said it was a liability. I just moved it underground, literally. They passed through a doorway into a wider space, a junction where 4 tunnels met. Steam hissed from a broken valve, filling the air with thick moisture. Mary grabbed a flashlight from a shelf that held an odd collection of supplies, blankets, bottled water, basic medical equipment. I treat people down here, she continued, leading him into the eastern tunnel. The ones who can't go upstairs, undocumented workers, addicts, people with warrants, your soldiers sometimes, when they can't risk a hospital record. Vincent was quiet, processing this. He'd built an empire in Chicago's shadows, but Mary had built something else, entirely. A parallel world beneath his world, saving the people who fell through the cracks his empire created. That enforcer, he said, the one who told you about the bullets. You saved him down here? In a room that used to be a fallout shelter. He'd been gut shot in one of your territory disputes. His girlfriend begged me. Mary turned down a narrower passage, ducking under a low-hanging pipe. I had him on a folding table with a camping lantern for light. No anesthesia except vodka. No monitors. But he lived. Did he pay you? She laughed, sharp and bitter. With a warning. He told me to stay away from Vincent Martini. Said you were dangerous. Said everyone close to you ended up dead or destroyed. The words hung in the steam-thick air between them. Vincent wanted to argue, to defend himself. But how could he? The man had been right. Everyone close to Vincent did end up destroyed. His father, murdered in a power play. His mother, dead from grief 6 months later. His sister, married off to a rival family and forbidden from contact. And Mary, burned and left for dead in a warehouse fire caused by his family's endless war. They emerged into a larger space, the old fallout shelter Mary had mentioned. It had been repurposed into something between a clinic and a camp. Cots lined one wall, plastic bins held medical supplies. A propane camping stove sat on a metal table. The walls were painted with murals, crude but colorful, depicting flowers and sunshine, probably painted by grateful patients. "This is it," Mary said. "My clinic. My real clinic." Vincent looked around, taking it in. The dirt-streaked walls, the makeshift equipment, the evidence of hundreds of lives saved in conditions that would make a battlefield medic weep. And he understood, finally, why she'd looked like she'd crawled out of hell when she'd walked into his hospital room. Because she had. Every single day. "Mary, He stopped, unsure what he was even trying to say. "Sorry? Thank you. How do you apologize for a decade of abandonment? How do you thank someone for saving your life when you're the reason they had to become this in the first place? She wasn't looking at him. She was gathering supplies, fresh bandages, antibiotics, a bottle of water. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to one of the cots. "I need to check your sutures." He sat, wincing as the movement pulled at his chest. Above them, the pipes groaned and hissed. Somewhere in the distance, water dripped with a steady rhythm, the sounds of the hospital's hidden circulatory system. Mary peeled away his blood-soaked bandages with gentle efficiency. Her fingers were stained, not with blood, but with the permanent grime of this underground world. He noticed her nails were clipped short, practical. No jewelry, no softness. "2 sutures torn," she announced. "Could be worse. I'll reseal them, but you need to stop moving like you're invincible." "I'm not invincible. I just got shot by my best friend." "Former best friend," Mary corrected, threading a needle. "No anesthetic for this part." "The good drugs are upstairs?" He nodded, bracing himself. "I've had worse." She began to stitch, and Vincent focused on her face instead of the pain. She was concentrating, her brow furrowed in that way he remembered from childhood, when she'd focus so intently on a book she'd forget the world around her. She'd been brilliant even then. Should have been a doctor in some clean, prestigious hospital. Should have had a life that didn't involve hiding in tunnels and stitching up criminals by flashlight. "You could have left Chicago," he said quietly. "After the fire, you could have gone anywhere. Started over somewhere clean." Her hands paused for just a moment. "I did start over. Here. In a basement. Helping people." She pulled the thread tight, knotted it. "Which is more than you can say. That's not fair, isn't it?" Now she did look at him, and her eyes were hard. "You became exactly what your father wanted, a king of criminals. How many lives have you destroyed, building your empire, Vincent? How many fires have you set?" He had no answer. The truth was too heavy, too damning. Mary finished the last suture and stepped back. "We can't stay here long. If Rico's men are competent, they'll search the entire hospital. These tunnels will buy us time, but not much." "Where do we go?" She was quiet for a moment, staring at the murals on the wall. "5th Street, she said finally. "The old neighborhood. There are people there who'll hide us. People who owe me. People I destroyed." "Yes." She met his eyes. "People you destroyed. So maybe try not to act like a king when we get there. Try to remember what it was like to be human." Vincent stood slowly, testing his balance. The pain was manageable now, a dull roar instead of a scream. "I do remember," he said quietly. "I remember everything." Mary shouldered a small pack of supplies and headed toward a different tunnel, one that led, presumably, toward the old neighborhood and a past neither of them could escape. "Then prove it," she said, without looking back. And Vincent Martini, King of Chicago, followed a ghost into the darkness. They emerged from the tunnels through a rusted access grate in an alley behind a shuttered laundromat. 3 blocks deep into the neighborhood, Vincent hadn't set foot in for 8 years. The air smelled like garbage and desperation, and something else, something he'd forgotten existed. Community. Mary climbed out first, then reached back to help him. Vincent gripped her hand and pulled himself up. His dress shoes, ridiculously expensive, he realized now, splashing in a puddle of something he didn't want to identify. His tailored pants were ruined. His chest screamed with every movement. He looked, he knew, like exactly what he was. A wounded king in enemy territory. "Stay close," Mary murmured. and let me do the talking." They walked through streets Vincent had once known, as well as his own heartbeat. But everything had changed, or maybe he had. The buildings were more dilapidated now, windows boarded up or covered with sheets, graffiti-marked territory lines he didn't recognize. A group of young men on a corner went silent as they passed, eyes tracking Vincent with the wary assessment of people who knew trouble when they saw it. One of them stepped forward, blocking their path. "Dr. Mary." His voice was cautious but not hostile. "That you?" "It's me, Carlos." Mary's voice softened in a way Vincent had never heard. "I need a favor." Carlos was maybe 20, with a tattoo of a Virgin Mary on his neck and scars on his knuckles. His eyes slid to Vincent, and recognition flickered across his face. "Holy shit, is that someone who needs help?" Mary cut in. "Can we trust you?" The young man looked between them, clearly trying to piece together why Dr. Mary, the angel who'd saved his sister from an overdose, was standing in an alley with Vincent Martini at 1 a.m. Finally he nodded. "Rosa's place. 2 blocks. I'll make the call." He pulled out a phone, and Mary touched his arm. "Carlos, no one can know. Not even your crew. I know how this works." "Doc." He was already dialing. "You saved Lucia. I owe you everything." 10 minutes later, they were climbing the stairs of a tenement building that should have been condemned years ago. Vincent's legs felt like lead, each step a monumental effort. Blood was seeping through his fresh sutures again, and dark spots danced at the edges of his vision. "Almost there," Mary said, supporting more of his weight now. The door on the 3rd floor opened before they reached it. An older woman stood there, maybe 60, with steel-grey hair and eyes that had seen too much. She looked at Vincent without surprise, without fear, just a kind of weary resignation. "Rosa," Mary said. "Thank you. Come in before someone sees you." Rosa stepped aside, revealing a tiny apartment that was spotlessly clean despite its obvious poverty. Religious candles flickered on a shelf. The smell of cooking beans lingered in the air. "The bedroom, quickly." They got Vincent onto the bed, a lumpy mattress that felt like heaven after the tunnel floors. Rosa disappeared and returned with towels, a basin of water, and a bottle of whiskey. "Your supplies are still here," she told Mary, gesturing to a closet. "I kept them like you asked." Vincent watched as Mary opened the closet to reveal a cache of medical equipment. A proper kit, better than what she'd had in the tunnels. Rosa had been storing it for her, planning for moments like this. "How many?" he asked, his voice rough. "How many people are hiding your supplies?" Mary didn't look at him as she prepped fresh bandages. 17 locations across the neighborhood, people I've treated. People who understand that sometimes we have to take care of our own because no one else will. Rosa brought him water, and he drank gratefully. She studied him with those ancient eyes, and he had the uncomfortable feeling of being judged and found wanting. "You don't remember me, do you?" she asked. Vincent frowned, trying to place her face. 10 years ago. You and your father's men came through here during the turf war with the Volkovs. Burned down 3 buildings to flush them out. My husband was inside one of them. He was a janitor. Just in the wrong place." The water turned to ash in Vincent's mouth. "I'm sorry," he managed. "Sorry doesn't bring him back." Rosa's voice was flat, factual. "But Dr. Mary saved my grandson last year. Pneumonia. He would have died waiting for an ambulance that never comes to this neighborhood. So I'm helping her, not you." She left the room, and Vincent was alone with Mary and the weight of his sins. "How many of them?" he asked quietly. "How many people here have I hurt?" Mary was changing his bandages, her movements brisk and clinical. Carlos's sister Lucia. Overdosed on heroin that came through your docks. Rosa you just heard. Miguel from the boiler room. Lost his job at one of your warehouses when you restructured last year. Angela, the nurse who helped in surgery. Her brother is in prison because he couldn't make the protection payment to one of your collectors. Each name was a small knife, precisely placed. And you've been saving them, Vincent said. All of them. Cleaning up my damage. Someone had to. Finally, she looked at him, and her eyes held something he couldn't quite read. Not hatred, but not forgiveness either. You wanted to know why I stayed in Chicago? This is why. Because every person your empire destroys, I try to put back together. It's not redemption. It's just necessary. A knock at the door made them both tense. Rosa's voice came through. Dr. Mary, Mrs. Chen is here, and old Jack. They heard you were back. Mary went to the door, and Vincent watched as people filed in. A parade of the forgotten and the forsaken. An elderly Chinese woman who bowed to Mary like she was a saint. A grizzled veteran in a wheelchair who gripped Mary's hand with tears in his eyes. A young mother with a baby who reached for Mary immediately. They'd come to see the angel, to make sure she was safe. And they looked at Vincent like he was exactly what he was, the devil in their midst. But they didn't throw him out. Didn't call the cops or Rico's men. They brought food, humble offerings of rice and beans and bread. They brought blankets. One old man even brought his own pain medication, pressing the pills into Mary's hand for Vincent's use. For the doc, he said gruffly. Not for him. But she needs him alive for some reason. So, Vincent sat on that borrowed bed, eating borrowed food, protected by borrowed grace, and understood for the first time in his adult life what he'd really built. Not an empire, a wasteland. And Mary had been walking through it for years, trying to plant flowers in the ruins. Thank you, he said to the room at large. His voice cracked. All of you. Thank you. No one responded. They simply nodded and filtered out, leaving Vincent and Mary alone again in the small, clean room that smelled like beans and candle wax and survival. Get some rest, Mary said, setting up a chair by the window where she could watch the street. We move again before dawn. Mary, rest, Vincent. You'll need your strength for what comes next. He wanted to say more, wanted to apologize, to promise to be better, to somehow make right a decade of wrongs. But the words felt too small, too inadequate. So instead, he closed his eyes and listened to the sounds of the neighborhood he'd abandoned. Car horns, distant sirens, voices in Spanish and English and Chinese, the symphony of survival. And for the first time in years, Vincent Martini felt truly awake. Vincent woke to find Mary gone and sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. His chest ached with every breath, but the pain was duller now, manageable. He sat up carefully, testing his range of motion, and found fresh clothes laid out on the chair. Cheap jeans, a plain black t-shirt, a worn jacket. Nothing like what he usually wore, but that was precisely the point. Rosa appeared in the doorway with coffee and a burner phone. The doctor said you'd need this. She went to check on her patients, said she'd be back in an hour. Vincent took both gratefully. The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly what he needed. The phone was a prepaid flip model, untraceable, the kind sold in corner stores for cash. He turned it over in his hands, thinking about the last time he'd used one of these. With Mary, a lifetime ago. Thank you, he said, for everything. I know you didn't do it for me. Rosa leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. My grandson is 6 years old. He laughs now, plays soccer in the street. Last year at this time, he was choking on fluid in his own lungs, and I was praying to a God I'd stopped believing in. Dr. Mary brought him back. She's remarkable. She's a saint. Rosa's voice was firm. And you're going to get her killed if you're not careful. Those men who came to the hospital, they'll find out she helped you. They'll come for her. I know. Vincent met her eyes. That's why I have to end this. Today. He waited until Rosa left before making the first call. Antonio picked up on the second ring. It's me, Vincent said simply. Silence. Then, Jesus Christ, Vincent? We heard you were dead. Rico said. Rico lied. Rico shot me and left me to die. Vincent kept his voice level, controlled. Where are you? At the Sapphire. There's a meeting, all the capos. Rico called it for noon. He's saying, Antonio's voice dropped. He's saying you're dead and he's taking over. Says he has proof. Says it's time for new leadership. Vincent checked the cheap digital clock on the nightstand. 10:47 a.m. Who's with him? Sal, definitely. Maybe Marco. It's hard to tell. Everyone's scared, Vincent. Without you, the family fractures. Rico knows it. He's offering stability. Built on my corpse. A corpse we all thought was real. Antonio paused. How bad are you hurt? Bad enough. But I can walk, I can talk, and I can prove Rico's a traitor. Vincent thought of the silver-lead bullet, now wrapped in gauze and tucked in Mary's medical bag. I need you to do something for me. Anything. Get to the Sapphire early. Bring Paolo and Tommy if you trust them. When I walk in, I need to know someone's got my back. Another pause. Vincent, if you're wrong about who's loyal, then I'm already dead anyway. Vincent stood, testing his legs. Noon. The main casino floor. Make sure everyone's there. He made 2 more calls. Paolo, his enforcer, loyal as a dog and twice as mean, answered with a string of profanity that would have made a sailor blush. Boss! Holy shit, boss! We thought, where the hell are you? Alive? Can you get to the Sapphire? I can get anywhere. You need me to kill Rico. Say the word. Not yet. Just be there. Be ready. Tommy was harder to reach, and when he finally picked up, his voice was wary. Vincent? You sound surprised. Rico said you were dead. Had your ring. Your watch. Said the Volkovs hit you. Vincent's jaw tightened. His ring. The family signet his father had worn, that his grandfather had worn. Rico must have taken it from the hospital room, or had someone retrieve it. Physical proof of Vincent's death. The Volkovs didn't touch me, Vincent said, but someone wearing my family's bullets did. You understand what I'm saying, Tommy? A sharp intake of breath. The custom rounds, but only the inner circle, yeah. Vincent let that sink in. Noon at the Sapphire. You in or out? In. Always in, boss. 3 men, out of a family of 30 soldiers, countless associates, and a network that ran through half of Chicago, Vincent could only be certain of 3 men. The realization was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. Mary returned as he was finishing his coffee, carrying a bag of medical supplies and a newspaper. She looked exhausted, with new smudges of dirt on her face and arms. 3 people this morning, she said, dropping the bag on the floor. A stab wound, a diabetic crisis, and a kid with strep throat. Just another day in the forgotten kingdom. Vincent held up the phone. I made some calls. There's a meeting at the Sapphire Casino at noon. Rico's declaring himself the new boss. So you're going to crash your own funeral? Something like that. He stood, pulling on the jacket she'd left for him. It was too big in the shoulders, too worn, but it would do. I need you to do something for me. I'm already doing something for you. keeping you alive. I need you to stay here. Stay safe. Let me handle—" "No." Her voice was flat. Absolute. "I have the bullet. The only physical evidence you have. Where I go, it goes. Mary, these are dangerous men. If something happens, something already happened. They shot you. They sent killers to a hospital. You think they won't connect me to your survival?" She moved closer, and he could see the fire in her eyes, that same stubborn determination that had kept her alive through the warehouse fire, through years of poverty, through everything. "I'm not hiding while you walk into a room full of people who might kill you. We end this together, or we don't end it at all." Vincent wanted to argue, to protect her, to send her somewhere far away from the violence that was coming. But he knew that look, had seen it 1,000 times when they were kids, and she'd decided something was right. "Together," he said finally. "Together." She pulled the silver lead bullet from her bag, holding it up to the light. "Let's go show them what betrayal looks like." They left Rose's apartment at 11:30, walking through streets that watched them with wary eyes. Word had spread overnight. The angel was back, and she had the dead king with her. People whispered from windows and doorways, but no one interfered. Carlos met them 3 blocks from the Sapphire with an old Honda. Its paint faded, and one headlight cracked. "For the dock," he said, handing Mary the keys. "Bring it back when you can." "Thank you, Carlos." The young man looked at Vincent, his expression unreadable. "My sister's been clean for 8 months because of Dr. Mary, so I'm helping. But you should know, people are talking about who you are, what you've done. You hurt her, and this whole neighborhood comes for you, king or not." Vincent met his gaze steadily. "I know, and they should." They drove in silence through streets that gradually shifted from poverty to prosperity, from broken windows to gleaming storefronts. The Sapphire Casino rose ahead of them like a jewel, Vincent's jewel, built with blood money and backroom deals, the crown of his empire. Mary parked 2 blocks away. Last chance to reconsider. "No reconsidering, not anymore." Vincent touched his chest, feeling the fresh bandages beneath the cheap t-shirt. "I've spent 10 years being the king. Maybe it's time to remember how to be human." They walked toward the casino together, a wounded king and his ghost, ready to reclaim a throne or die trying. The choice, Vincent knew, was no longer entirely his to make. The Sapphire Casino's main floor was packed when they arrived. Every capo, every lieutenant, every significant player in the Martini organization had answered Rico's summons. They stood in clusters around the high-stakes poker table where family business was traditionally conducted. Their voices a low murmur of speculation and fear. Rico stood at the head of the table, Vincent's signet ring on his finger, looking every inch the new king. He was mid-speech when the crowd noise changed, when heads began to turn toward the entrance. Vincent walked in like a man rising from the grave. He looked nothing like the King of Chicago. His clothes were borrowed and cheap. Blood had seeped through his shirt in dark patches. His face was pale, drawn with pain. He leaned heavily on Mary, who supported him with steady determination, her own appearance still marked by the underground. Dirt under her nails, soot on her scrubs, the look of someone who lived in the spaces between. The room went silent. "Gentlemen," Vincent said, his voice carrying despite its roughness, "I hope I'm not interrupting." Rico's face cycled through shock, fear, and finally rage. "That's impossible. You're dead." Vincent pushed forward, the crowd parting before him like water. Mary stayed at his side, her presence a quiet anchor. "Yeah, I was supposed to be. Funny how that worked out." They reached the poker table. Vincent's loyal capos, Antonio, Paolo, Tommy, had positioned themselves strategically around the room. Their hands were near their weapons, their eyes locked on Rico and the men standing with him. Vincent, thank God. Rico's recovery was smooth, his voice filling with false relief. We heard you were attacked. The Volkovs, we thought... Cut the shit, Rico. Vincent's voice cracked like a whip. We both know who shot me. The room tensed. Hands moved toward guns. Mary felt it, the violence coiling like a spring about to release. She placed her hand on Vincent's arm, steadying him, reminding him silently that there was another way. Vincent took a breath and nodded. When he spoke again, his voice was calmer, but no less deadly. Someone put a bullet in my chest 3 nights ago, right here. He touched his bandaged chest. Millimeters from my aorta. A perfect shot. Not meant to kill immediately, but to make me suffer. To make me weak. The Volkovs, Rico tried again. Used custom ammunition. Vincent looked around the room, making eye contact with each man. Silver-lead composite rounds, the kind that only 5 people in this organization have access to. The kind kept in our family vault. He held out his hand to Mary. She reached into her bag and placed the bullet in his palm, still wrapped in gauze, still marked with his blood. Vincent unwrapped it slowly, deliberately, letting everyone see the distinctive swirl pattern, the custom weight. Then he threw it onto the poker table. It landed with a small clink that sounded like thunder in the silent room. That came out of my chest, Vincent said. Dr. Andrews here extracted it, saved my life while someone... He looked directly at Rico. Sent killers to the hospital to finish the job. Rico's hand moved toward his jacket, but Paolo was faster. The click of a hammer being cocked echoed through the casino. I wouldn't, Paolo said quietly. This is insane, Rico snarled, but his voice had lost its confidence. You're going to believe this? He shows up half dead with some girl from the slums and a bullet that could be from anywhere. Some girl? Antonio stepped forward, his weathered face hard. That's Dr. Mary Andrews. She runs the underground clinic on 5th Street. Saved my nephew last year. Saved half-hour soldiers at one time or another. She's got more honor in her little finger than you've got in your whole body, Rico. Other heads were nodding. Mary's reputation, it seemed, extended further than Vincent had realized. The bullets from our vault, Tommy added, moving to pick it up from the table. He examined it under the light. No question. I've used these rounds myself. Only 5 of us have the combination. Then someone else, Rico started. You were the one who insisted I take that meeting, Vincent interrupted. You were the one who knew my schedule. You were the one who had access to my location, my routes, my security detail. He took a step closer, and despite his weakness, despite his borrowed clothes and bloody bandages, he was every inch a king. And you were the one who couldn't wait even 3 days before declaring yourself boss. Rico's composure cracked. You're weak. You've been weak for years, refusing to expand, refusing to take what's ours, all because of some misguided guilt over a dead girl. He stopped, realizing his mistake, his eyes cutting to Mary. Not so dead, Mary said softly. The recognition hit Rico's face, the memory of the warehouse fire, the girl Vincent had mourned, the weakness he'd exploited. You, he breathed. Me. Mary's voice was steady. The ghost that's been haunting him. The reason he wouldn't let you turn this family into butchers. I've been putting your victims back together for years, Rico. I know exactly what you wanted to build. Vincent moved then, faster than a man with his injuries should have been able to. He grabbed Rico by the collar and slammed him against the poker table. You tried to kill me, Vincent said, his voice low and deadly. You failed, and now you're going to tell everyone in this room exactly why you did it. Or I let Paolo take you apart, piece by piece. Rico looked around at the circle of hard faces, at the guns now openly drawn and pointed at him, at the empire he'd tried to steal, crumbling in his hands. Because you're weak, he spat. Because you care more about the people you've destroyed than the family you're supposed to lead. Because you'd burn everything your father built for a dead girl and her bleeding heart. Wrong, Vincent said. She's the only thing I got right. He released Rico and stepped back. Antonio, Paolo, take him to the basement. Let him think about betrayal for a while. We'll decide what to do with him later. As they dragged Rico away, still cursing and struggling, Vincent turned to address the room. I've been a king, he said, his voice carrying despite his exhaustion. I've built an empire, and I've destroyed more than I've created. That ends now. He gestured to Mary, who stood quietly beside the poker table, still holding her medical bag. This woman has spent 10 years cleaning up our collateral damage, saving the people we hurt, being the angel in the darkness we created. From now on, that's the family's priority. We protect our own, not just the soldiers, but the neighborhoods. We fund her clinic. We make sure no one dies in the street because they can't afford a doctor. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some looked skeptical, others thoughtful. Anyone who doesn't like it, Vincent continued, can leave now. But this is my family, and this is how we move forward. With strength, yes, but also with something that matters. Silence. Then Antonio stepped forward and placed his hand on Vincent's shoulder. With you, boss. Always. One by one, the others followed. Tommy, Paolo, even Sal, who'd been standing with Rico, slowly moved to Vincent's side. The king had reclaimed his throne. 3 months later, the St. Jude Medical Center opened its doors on 5th Street. It was state-of-the-art, gleaming equipment, proper operating theaters, a full staff. The building had once been a warehouse, abandoned and rotting. Now it stood as a monument to possibility. Vincent stood at the entrance, watching Mary give orders to nurses, organize supply rooms, check on patients in clean beds with proper monitoring equipment. She still had dirt under her nails. Some things never changed, but now she had resources, safety, a chance to save lives without working in shadows. She saw him watching and walked over, wiping her hands on her new scrubs. Thank you, she said simply, for this. It's not enough, Vincent replied. It'll never be enough for what I took from you. No, Mary agreed. But it's a start. She'd refused his other offers, a place in his organization, his protection as anything more than a silent partner in the clinic's funding. She'd made it clear. She would accept his money to help people, but she wouldn't join his world. Some lines couldn't be uncrossed. The neighborhood's changing, Vincent said. Less violence, more resources. People are starting to hope again. People are watching you, Mary corrected, waiting to see if you mean it. If this is real or just another power play, it's real. He meant it. The empire was still there. He couldn't dismantle it overnight without creating a power vacuum that would consume the city. But he could reshape it. Make it less about destruction and more about protection. It was a narrow path, maybe an impossible one. But it was the only path he could see that led anywhere worth going. Mary studied his face, and something in her expression softened. Not forgiveness. That would take time, if it came at all. But understanding. Recognition that people could change, even kings. The boy I knew died in that warehouse fire, she said quietly. But maybe someone better came back. Vincent touched his chest, feeling the scar beneath his shirt. The bullet had missed his heart by millimeters. Mary had saved him from death. But maybe, in some ways, she'd saved him from something worse, from becoming a man so lost in power that he forgot what it meant to be human. "I'm trying," he said. "I know." She smiled then, small but real. "Keep trying. The neighborhood's counting on it." She went back to her work, and Vincent watched her go, the angel of the underground, finally given wings to fly in the light. He'd built an empire in shadows. Maybe now he could build something worth having in the sun. Redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about accepting responsibility for it and choosing every single day to build something better. Power without compassion creates wastelands, but compassion with resources can transform them into gardens. The greatest strength isn't in dominating others, it's in lifting them up, especially when you're the one who knocked them down. A call to action. In your own community, there are people working in the shadows to help those the system has forgotten. They run food banks in church basements. They provide free medical care in community centers. They tutor kids who can't afford help. They're the real angels of the underground. Find them. Support them. Whether it's through donations, volunteering, or simply spreading the word, help them do their work. Because the measure of a society isn't in its towers and castles. It's in how it treats the people in the forgotten spaces, the ones working in the dirt to save lives no one else values. Be the change. Fund the clinic. Lift the angel. The world has enough kings. It needs more healers,